Hi everyone, welcome back to another video in the Web Security Academy series. In the previous video, we covered the fourth lab in the SQL injection module. So we got some hands-on experience by exploiting a union-based SQL injection in order to determine the data type of the columns that are being returned by the vulnerable query. In today's lab, we'll be using a union-based SQL injection attack in order to retrieve all the usernames and passwords of the users of the application. If you do not have an account on the Web Security Academy, you can get one by visiting the URL portswigger.net/websecurity and clicking on the sign up button. I already have an account and I am logged in, so to access the lab, I'm going to click on Academy, select the learning path, select the SQL injection module because that's the module we're working with. Go down, select SQL injection union attacks, go down, and click on the lab titled SQL Injection Union Attack Retrieving Data from Other Tables. Before we solve the exercise, it's worth mentioning that this lab builds up on the knowledge that was acquired in the previous two labs. And so I'm going to assume that you've solved the labs and you're already familiar with this type of attack. If you haven't, feel free to pause this video and watch the videos for labs number 3 and labs number 4. All right, let's get started. This lab contains a SQL injection vulnerability in the product category filter. Got SQL injection, and that's in the product category filter. The results from the query are returned in the application's response, so you can use a union attack to retrieve data from other tables. To construct such an attack, you need to combine some of the techniques you learned in the previous labs. So this is lab number 3 and lab number 4 that I was talking about. The database contains a different table called users with columns called username and password. To solve the lab, perform a SQL injection union attack that retrieves all usernames and passwords and use this information to log in as the administrator user. Our end goal over here is to output the usernames and passwords in the users table and log in as the administrator user. Okay, let's access the lab. While the lab spins up, I'm going to create an analysis section. And just like we discussed in the previous lab, there are 2 steps that you need to perform before you can actually output data on the page. And the first one is you need to determine the number of columns that the vulnerable query is using. The second thing is you need to determine the data type of the columns. Okay, going back to the application, we said that it's a product category filter that is vulnerable. So if we hit gifts, you see in the URL there's a parameter called category, and that's our vulnerable field. You can confirm that by just putting a single quote, which is a SQL character. That results in an internal server error because it resulted in a syntax error in the database, which resulted in an internal server error in the application. So this is our vulnerable field. Now we need to determine the number of columns that are being used in the query that filters based on category. And we said the way to do that is to use the order by clause and to iteratively order by each column until we get an internal server error. Now, when we get an internal server error, that means we're trying to order by a column that does not exist. And that's why the number of columns that the query is using would be that column that we're ordering by minus 1. So let's start off with ordering by 1. This should work because I know for sure that the application is at least using two columns, one for the title, so snow delivered to your door, and one for the description. So those are the ones that I can see on the page, but it's possible that there's more that are not outputted on the page. Let's hit enter, and we get an error, and the reason is because we didn't comment out the rest of the query. Let's try that again. Here we go. It looks like it's ordering by the title. So you see over here, it starts with C and then moves on to H, S, and so on. Okay, so we have at least one column. Now let's try ordering by 2. And we don't get an internal server error. So I think what it's doing, it's ordering by the second column, which is this one over here. And you'll see over here, it starts off with an A, second one is a B, and so on. Okay, now let's order by the third column. And we get an internal server error. Which means that the number of columns is 3 minus 1. So we know that there's 2 columns. The next step is to determine the data type of the columns. We're thinking the query is something similar to this. So select AB from maybe products table, where category. Now, in order to determine the data type, we said in the previous lab, the way to do that is to add union statement. So we're closing off this quote over here. And then iteratively add select null statements with a string value in each column until we hit an error. So let's try with the first column. Now I have only 2 columns over here because I already know that there's 2 columns based on my first step. Let's see if this gives us an error. If it does, that means that this column does not accept data type string. Okay. You could see over here that we output the character A. And so the first column, which is the title column, accepts the string value. Okay, let's try the second one. And we also don't get an error for this one. And so you'll see it over here, A and A. And what that means is that both columns are of data type string. That means if I want to output data from other tables in the database, I can use both these columns. And the end goal for this exercise was to output the usernames and passwords in the users table and log in as the administrator user. So to do that, I'm going to use a union query again and say select the username field and the password field from the users table. Then comment out the rest of the query. Now, the reason I can do this is because 1, the number of columns in this query is equal to the number of columns in the original query over here. And so this works. If I was only able to find one column over here that is outputted on the page or only one column that has data type string, then I would have to output each column on its own and then output the second column because the page only allows me to output one column at a time. Or what I could do is try to concatenate the result of 2 columns together so that they're outputted on a single column. And that's something that we'll learn in the next lab because you will come across situations where the page only displays one column of data type text. And so you have to work with that column. But in this case, it's easy. You only need to output 2 columns, and it just so happens that the page has 2 columns that are of data type text. And so it works. Let's copy that. Put it over here, hit enter, and here we go. So you could see over here it outputted the username Carlos and then the password of Carlos. Same goes for this user and this one over here. So this one's the one that we're interested in. So administrator and the password of administrator. I'm going to copy that. Put it over here and then log in as the user. Let's see if we can log in. Here we go. It says, congratulations, you solved the exercise. Now let's script the export. Okay, let's save this and start our script over here. The first thing I'm going to do is import the requests library. And then URL lib3. I'm also going to add this line over here so that I disable any warnings about insecure requests. Okay, next we'll set our proxy setting like we do with every lab. Okay, that looks better. All right, then we'll write the main function. Then try and accept clause. Okay, so what I want to do is I want my script to run like this. So it just takes in the URL parameter and then it outputs the administrator's hash. So we're not going to actually implement step number 1 and step number 2. Instead, we're going to assume that we know this based on manual hands-on testing, and we are going to hard code the values in the script. And the reason behind that is because it would take me about 30 minutes to write the script and involve all the steps. And we've already done it in previous labs, and so we'll keep that as an exercise, and instead for today, we'll just write a small script that outputs the administrator's hash. It takes in the URL from the first command line argument, and if you give it the incorrect number of command line arguments, I don't want it to throw an exception. Instead, I want it to print this text over here. So the usage instructions. And then an example of running the script. Let's say www.example.com, and then the name of the program. And then exit. All right. if you do give it the correct number of arguments and it sets the URL to the URL parameter over here, the next thing I want it to do is print dumping the list of usernames and passwords. And then I'm going to write a new function. So exploit SQLi users table URL. Then I wanted to print did not find greater password. Okay. If this function over here evaluates to false, then I wanted to print out it did not find an administrator password. All right, so let's write this function. So we're saying the username is equal to administrator. The path is equal to. In order to get that, let's fire up burp. And while burp is opening up, I believe this might have timed out, and so I'm going to open it again. Click next, close, start burp. Okay, set Foxy proxy to send requests to burp. And over here, I'm going to set intercept to be off. And then I'm going to click on GIF. And here we go. We could see the requests in the history tab of burp. So this one is the one that I'm interested in. Put that over here. So this is our path. Copy that. Next, we want our SQL payload. And it's this one over here. Okay. And then we'll make a GET request. And we're making a GET request because this is a GET request over here. R is equal to plus dot get. And it's the URL plus the path plus the payload. That verified to be equal false. And proxies be equal to proxy. So we're at our fifth lab right now, so this type of scripting should now become familiar or secondhand nature to you. Okay. And then I want to save the response in a variable called res. Okay, so I need a way to find the administrator's password from the response. So let's run the attack in the browser and see how it gets displayed in the response. Enter. Okay, and you should see it over here. All right, let's make that a little bit bigger. Okay, you see over here that you've got the administrator username and it's in the EH element, and then the password is in the TD element. So we need a way to parse the response, and to do that, we're going to import another library from BS4, import. Okay, so I'm going to say if the text administrator is in the response, then I'm going to print found the administrator password. And then I'm going to use my library to parse the response. So r.text, HTML parser, and then the admin password. We'll look for it in the body of the response. We'll use the find element where text is equal to administrator. And now what I really want to extract is the password of the administrator. So to do that, I'm going to use .parent, which will lead me to this element over here. And then I'm going to say find next. So find the next element, find the next TD element, which will send me to this element over here. And then extract the content, that element. So contents, 0. So there might be an easier way to do this, but it's late and that's the one that I can think of right now. What this should do is it should extract the password of the administrator user. Okay, and then I'm going to print the administrator password is so this variable over here. And then I'm going to return true. Otherwise, I'm going to return false. If it doesn't find the text administrator in the response, then it will return false. If it does find the text administrator, it's going to print found the administrator password. It'll parse the response over here. It'll look for administrator. It'll move to the parent element, so th, and then it'll move to the next element over here, td, and then it'll grab the content. Okay, so this should work. Let's do terminal, new terminal, and save this first. And then Python 3. And let's grab the URL. And we just need the URL of the application. Okay, let's hit enter. Got an error over here and it's because it's import. Let's clear that and run it again. And we get an exception. Oh, and the reason we're getting an exception, so I can tell it's a proxy issue, that it can't connect to the proxy, and the issue is right over here. That should have been 127.0.0.1 and 88. Okay, let's save that one more time and hopefully no more errors. Okay, so here we go. What it's doing, it says it's dumping the list of usernames and passwords. It checks to see if the response has the administrator string, and it does. And so it says found the administrator password, and then it dumps the administrator password over here. So let's look at burp. And that's the password over here. So you could see the request that it made. And administrator and the password over here. So this is definitely way more elegant if you're showcasing this to management or to your team. It's definitely way more elegant to show them a script where you just immediately run it and then it outputs the administrator password versus having to go through the browser and play around with the parameters until you get the password. Okay, so we've successfully completed the exercise. To recap, in this video, we first manually ran a SQL injection union attack in order to output the usernames and passwords of all the users in the application. We then scripted that exploit so that it automatically does that for us.